Into the Vortex, a story of storms, obsession, and the love that weathered them all. Chapter 1. The Man Who Chased Ghosts. Jack Calloway had driven 380,000 miles in 11 years, chasing storms, and not once had he questioned the math. Fuel receipts in a shoebox under his motel bed, instrument arrays zip-tied to a roll bar, a dash-mounted laptop older than most of his relationships. These were the coordinates of a life that made complete sense to him, even when nothing else did. He was 34 years old, lean in the way that people who forget to eat become lean, with eyes the color of a sky that cannot decide between calm and fury. A crescent scar traced the outer edge of his left eyebrow, a souvenir of a fence post that had blown through his windshield outside Dodge City 3 springs ago. He wore it the way some men wear medals, without thought, but not without pride. The town of Cordell, Oklahoma, baked under a hot May stillness as Jack pulled his battered white Chevy Tahoe into the parking lot of the Sunrise Diner. He had been driving since before dawn, tracking a mid-level disturbance that meteorology models had placed somewhere between promising and extraordinary. The National Weather Service had quietly issued a rare, particularly dangerous situation watch for the entire Central Corridor. That kind of watch made veteran chasers close their laptops for a moment and go very still. A particularly dangerous situation tornado watch is issued less than a dozen times each year. It signals conditions where long-track, violent tornadoes rated EF4 or EF5 are not just possible, but likely. Wind shear values and atmospheric instability had aligned in ways meteorologists described, in private group chats, as once in a decade. Jack ordered black coffee and a plate of eggs he would not finish. He spread a paper road atlas across the Formica table. Old school, he always said, because maps never crash during intercept. With a worn yellow highlighter, he traced the likely storm path, up through the Oklahoma Panhandle, across the Kansas line, threading between small towns like a needle through a quilt. His phone buzzed, a text from his former colleague Pete Navarro, who ran a storm-chasing tour company out of Norman. Hearing EF5 potential, you going in? Jack set the phone face down without replying. He had been chasing the same ghost for 11 years. Not just any tornado, the tornado. Every serious chaser had a story like his, the one that started the whole obsession, the one that never fully let go. For Jack, it was the spring of 2013, when he was 23 and working a summer harvest job outside Moore, Oklahoma. He had been 100 yards inside a storm shelter when an EF5 touched down, 2.5 miles wide. Wind speeds exceeding 210 miles per hour. It obliterated the landscape above him. When the doors finally opened, the world he stepped into was unrecognizable. No words had ever been adequate. He tried, in a journal he kept only for himself, and the pages were full of crossed-out sentences. That storm had taken a piece of him. He had been trying to get it back ever since. The waitress refilled his coffee without being asked. Outside the diner windows, the sky was beginning to do something interesting. The blue had gone greenish at the horizon. That particular shade, sulfurous and electric, that meant the atmosphere was building towards something extraordinary. A flock of starlings lifted from a telephone wire all at once. A single dark murmuration that swept north and was gone. Jack left $20 on the table, tucked his atlas under his arm, and walked back to the Tahoe. He climbed in, plugged his laptop into the power strip, and pulled up the latest rapid refresh model data. The numbers made him exhale slowly through his nose, something he did when the data was too good to say out loud. He keyed his radio. Callaway Mobile, heading north on 183. Storm motion suggests intercept window opens around 2:30 this afternoon. If this thing fires the way I think it will, today might be the one. He had said that before, 40, maybe 50 times. And every time the storm had been extraordinary and ordinary at once. Violent, majestic, humbling, and still somehow not it. Not the singular one he was building toward in his mind. Not the storm that would fill the crater the 2013 Moore tornado had left in him. But today, the models were saying something different. Today, the atmosphere itself seemed to be making a promise. He turned the key. The Tahoe rumbled to life. The sky ahead of him was turning the color of a bruise. Jack Calloway drove north into the dark. Chapter 2. Collision Course. She blew past him doing 90 on Highway 183, and for a fraction of a second, Jack thought he had imagined her. A streak of red and silver in his passenger window, gone before he could process it. Then his radio crackled on the chase frequency. Voss Mobile, northbound 183, approaching Leedy Junction, reading 64 on radar at bearing 340. Wind shear is incredible. This wall cloud is rotating hard. Recommend intercept position at the old grain elevator on County Road 580. Jack sat up straighter. The voice was calm, clipped, sure of itself. The voice of someone who had been in this exact situation many times and had developed a professional relationship with danger. He glanced in his mirror at the red pickup pulling away from him and, without entirely meaning to, pressed his accelerator down. He caught her at the junction. They both turned onto County Road 580 within seconds of each other, and when the road ended in a dirt turnout beside a rusting grain elevator, they both pulled in. The Tahoe and the red pickup sat 20 feet apart, nose out toward the western sky, engines ticking cool in the sudden silence. Jack got out. She got out. Dr. Mara Voss was exactly what her radio voice had suggested. Composed, precise, and entirely unbothered by the growing darkness on the horizon. She was his age, maybe a year or two younger, dark-haired and windburned, wearing a faded University of Oklahoma storm chase vest over a thermal base layer. She had a Kestrel weather meter in one hand and was already reading it as she walked, eyes cutting between the instrument and the sky. "You are Calloway," she said. "Not a question." "You have heard of me," he said. "Everyone in the community has heard of you," she said, glancing at him sideways. "Half of them think you are brilliant. The other half think you are reckless." "Which half are you?" he asked. She did not answer. She was looking at the sky. And what a sky it was! The supercell had organized itself in the last 30 minutes into something that made the chest tighten with a feeling that was equal parts terror and reverence. The mesocyclone, the massive rotating column at the heart of the storm, stretched from the ground to 40,000 feet, its underside churning with green-black cloud that moved in slow, deliberate arcs. Inflow winds were already tugging at their clothes, stealing words before they could form. The air smelled of ozone and cold iron. A supercell's wall cloud forms when moist inflow air is rapidly lifted into the rotating updraft. When the wall cloud itself begins to rotate, tornado development is imminent. What Jack and Mara were watching had been rotating for 11 minutes. In storm-chasing terms, that is an eternity. Mara pulled out a battered notebook and began writing, talking as she wrote. Rotating wall cloud, persistent, base maybe 2,000 feet above ground level. Inflow is sustained 40 knots from the southeast. Dust whirls developing at surface. She paused, reading her weather meter. Surface dew point 74. Good God. "You were doing research?" Jack asked. "I am always doing research. I am a meteorologist. You?" "I just chase," he said. She looked at him then, fully and directly, the way people do when they are deciding something. "Nobody just chases," she said. "What are you looking for?" It was the question nobody had ever asked him quite so directly. He found he did not have a ready answer. He opened his mouth, and at that exact moment, the wall cloud dropped a dark finger toward the earth. They both said the same word at the same time, funnel. And then there was no more conversation, because the tornado was forming, and when a tornado forms in front of you, every other thought in your mind dissolves like paper in rain. It touched down 2 miles to their northwest, a thick churning rope that widened at the contact point, chewing the red earth and throwing debris half a mile into the air. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely real. Mara was recording on her phone and scribbling and reading instruments simultaneously, doing 3 things at once with the focused efficiency of someone who had trained for this for years. Jack stood beside her, and for the first time in perhaps years, he was not thinking about 2013. He was simply here, present, in the howling presence of something ancient and indifferent and magnificent. The tornado stayed on the ground for 23 minutes. It crossed a county road, destroyed an empty barn, and disappeared back into the cloud base without killing a single person. When it was gone, the silence it left was enormous. Mara lowered her phone. Jack realized he was still standing there with nothing in his hands. "You forgot to document," she observed, without judgment. "I know," he said. She looked at him again with that direct, evaluating gaze. Something shifted in it, not softening exactly, but opening. "I am buying dinner," she said. "I always eat after an intercept. There is a diner in Woodward. You can buy your own coffee and tell me what you are actually looking for out here." "How do you know I am looking for something?" he asked. She was already walking to her truck. Because everyone who chases long enough is looking for something. The question is whether they know what it is. Jack followed her to Woodward. He was not sure, later, whether that had been a decision or just the most natural thing in the world. Chapter 3. 2 Compasses, 1 True North. They stayed in Woodward for 3 days. This was not the plan. There was no plan. Weather never allowed for one. But the storm system stalled over the Panhandle, recharging on Gulf moisture, and the forecast kept pushing the next significant outbreak one day further out, and somehow neither of them drove away. On the first evening, they talked for 4 hours at the diner. Mara learned that Jack had grown up in Enid, that he had a mechanical engineering degree he had never used, that he could recite the 1,974 super outbreak statistics like other people recite song lyrics. Jack learned that Mara had done her dissertation on tornado intensification cycles, that she had been published in the Journal of Atmospheric Sciences at age 27, that she drank her coffee with exactly 2 sugars and got quietly annoyed at people who called tornadoes twisters. On the second day, they drove together. Her idea? Practical logic, 2 sets of eyes and instruments. They sat under a building squall line that produced nothing more dramatic than hail and green sky. The anticlimax of it, Mara said, was its own kind of data. They ate gas station sandwiches in the Tahoe with the windows cracked while the hail rattled the roof, and she showed him her research notebook, and he showed her his handwritten storm logs going back to 2013, and something passed between them that was private and wordless and more intimate than either of them quite acknowledged. On the third evening, they walked out to the edge of Woodward, where the town thinned to trailers and then to wheat fields, and watched the sun set behind a distant anvil cloud. The light was extraordinary. Copper and violet, the sky doing things with color that no painter had ever quite captured. They were standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "You still have not told me," Mara said, "what you are looking for." He told her about more. About the shelter doors and what he had found when they opened. About the notebook with the crossed-out sentences. He had never told anyone the full version of this story. Not his sister, not the 3 or 4 people who had briefly been significant to him before the roads took over. He told Mara Voss because she asked the right question, and because the sunset demanded honesty, and because, he realized as he spoke, he trusted her in the complete and immediate way. You sometimes trust someone whose relationship with the same enormous, terrifying thing you love tells you everything you need to know about who they are. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. The anvil cloud caught the last of the light and turned the color of hammered gold. "You are trying to understand it," she said at last. "Not just document it. Understand why something that destructive can also be so beautiful. Why it takes things away, but also clarifies things." "Yes," he said. "That exactly." "I know that feeling," she said. "My first solo intercept, I was 24. An EF-3 outside Childress, Texas. I got too close. My own fault. I misjudged the motion vector. The storm turned, and I had to floor it down a dirt road at 100 miles an hour with debris raining around me, and I thought—" She stopped, then continued. "I thought, I understand now why people pray." "Did it answer anything?" Jack asked. She turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression that was complicated and clear at once. "Not then," she said, "but I have been working on it." He kissed her, or she kissed him. Later, neither of them could say with certainty who had moved first, and it seemed to both of them that the correct answer was probably, "The sky did it." Pause. The next morning, her phone woke them both at 5:47 inches the morning with an alert from the Storm Prediction Center. She read it over his shoulder in the pale gray light, and he felt her go absolutely still. The system had reloaded overnight. What the models had suggested 3 days ago as extraordinary was now being described in language that operational meteorologists almost never used. Words like historic. Words like unprecedented instability. Words like long-track violent tornado threat. She showed him the wind shear profile. He read it twice. Then he sat up and looked at the window where the pre-dawn sky was already the wrong color. Today, he said. Today? She agreed. There was a long beat of silence in the cheap motel room, filled with everything that had accumulated in 3 days and 1 night, and the specific weight of what they were about to drive toward. "We go together," Mara said. It was not quite a question. Jack reached for his keys on the nightstand. "Together," he said. Chapter 4. The Monster Wakes. By noon, the atmosphere had achieved something close to perfection. The terrible, indifferent perfection of a system operating exactly as physics allows, without consideration for the scale of the models and the small lives arranged beneath it. They had positioned on a hill outside of Arnett, Kansas, instruments running, cameras rolling, radio traffic filling the cab with voices from 20 other chase teams triangulating the same impossibility. Mara was on the phone with her contact at the National Weather Service office in Dodge City, and what he was telling her made her reach over and grip Jack's forearm without looking at him. "He says the rotation on this mesocyclone is as strong as anything they have ever recorded," she said when she hung up. Doppler showing over 200-knot gate-to-gate shear at 3,000 feet. Jack said nothing. He was looking at the sky. The wall cloud had descended to perhaps 1,500 feet above the ground. It was rotating with a deliberate, almost leisurely power that was somehow more frightening than violence. The way a very large, very dangerous thing moves when it has nothing to fear. Beneath it, the ground was being organized. Dirt and debris were being recruited upward in slow spirals. The inflow roar was constant now, a sound like the world inhaling. And then the funnel appeared. It did not drop tentatively, as funnels often do. It descended in a single, decisive movement, a trunk of condensation the width of a city block, and where it touched the earth disappeared. What replaced it was a column of debris a mile wide, moving northeast at 35 miles per hour, growing as it moved, growing in a way that had no apparent ceiling. The tornado that touched down at 12:47 inches the afternoon on May 17th, 2 miles southwest of Arnett, would later be rated EF5 with peak winds of 296 miles per hour and a maximum width of 3.1 miles. It was the widest tornado ever recorded in Kansas history. Its damage path would stretch 61 miles. For 6 minutes, they watched from their hill. Mara filled pages. Jack filmed everything. The radio was a chorus of awe and alarm. Veteran chasers, people who had seen hundreds of tornadoes, reduced to single syllables. "That is something else. Oh my God, I have never seen anything like this." Jack realized, at some point, that he was crying. Not from fear, not from grief, exactly. From recognition. This was the thing he had been moving toward for 11 years. Not this specific storm, perhaps, but this. The proof that nature contains something beyond human scale, beyond human vocabulary, beyond the comfortable boundaries of what we tell ourselves we understand. The 2013 crater in him was not being filled. It was being acknowledged, finally, by something equal to itself. He felt Mara's hand on his arm. He looked at her. She was watching him, not the storm. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, and meant it in a way that surprised him. "I am..." Then her laptop alarm went off. And then every radio in the car went off at the same time. Tornado path shift. Track moving east-northeast, accelerating. All chase teams advised immediate repositioning. Mara had the radar pulled up in 3 seconds. Her face went white. "Jack," she said. Her voice was flat and careful in the way that voices go flat and careful when the alternative is panic. It turned. It is tracking directly toward Harmon. Population 2,200. She turned the laptop toward him. And it turned toward us. The tornado, 3 miles wide and growing, was coming directly for the hill where they sat. Jack started the engine. Chapter 5. Into the Dark. The rule every storm chaser knows and every chaser who has survived long enough repeats like a prayer is that you never try to outrun a tornado. You get out of its path, perpendicular. You run east or south, never north, Never ahead. You do not race it. Tornadoes move at 35 miles per hour on average, but on their best days, on the days they feel like it, they can move at 60. No vehicle on a dirt road wins that race. Jack knew the rule. He turned south. The county road beneath them was gravel and ran straight for a mile before it jogged east. They were doing 70 on it, which was 20 miles per hour more than anyone should attempt on loose gravel, and the Tahoe fishtailed with every gust, which were now constant and building. Behind them, the roar was no longer the sound of the world inhaling. It was the sound of the world ending. A freight train scaled up by an order of magnitude, a sound that penetrated beyond hearing into something more fundamental. "Do not look back," Mara said. He looked back. He could not help it. The tornado filled the entire rearview mirror. Its leading edge was less than a mile behind them, and the debris cloud around its base had already consumed the hill where they had been standing 60 seconds ago. The air was full of things. Fence posts, sheet metal, what appeared to be a pickup truck spinning slowly at 200 feet. The sky behind it was the green-black of absolute annihilation. His hands on the wheel were completely steady. He noticed this as a stranger might notice it. Mara was on the radio. "Voss Mobile to all units, confirmed EF5 tracking east-northeast directly toward Harmon Township. All residents seek immediate shelter. Tornado is minimum 3 miles wide. Any units south of the 580 corridor, evacuate now." The radio dissolved in static as the electromagnetic interference from the storm swallowed the signal. The road jogged east. Jack hit the turn at 55 miles per hour, and the Tahoe went up on 2 wheels for a moment that lasted forever before dropping back. Something large struck the roof, a sound like a hammer blow. The rear window cracked in a starburst pattern but held. Mara did not flinch. She was watching the radar on her laptop, which she was somehow keeping level with one hand. "Turn north in half a mile. There is a highway underpass," she said. "Underpasses are death traps," he said. "Not this one. It is a recessed culvert, below grade, concrete. I drove it this morning." She paused. "I scope exits when I scout positions. It is habit." He turned north. The highway appeared in the headlights. The sky was now so dark it was effectively night at 15 inches the afternoon. Beneath the overpass she had described was a concrete culvert running perpendicular to the road, deep enough that a person lying flat inside it would be 6 feet below the pavement surface. Jack stopped the Tahoe at an angle to the wind, and they were out in an instant. The wind outside was a physical thing, not air, but solid force. They ran for the culvert together and dropped into it, and pressed their backs against the concrete, with their arms linked, and the sound filled everything. The sound was the end of language. "There are no words," Jack had written in his crossed-out notebook entries, and here inside the sound he finally understood why. Language is a human invention. The thing above them was not. The tornado passed to their south by 3/4 of a mile. 3/4 of a mile is a long distance for a tornado that is 3 miles wide. The outer debris field washed over the overpass in a torrent that lasted 4 minutes. Shrapnel rain, hailstones the size of baseballs, pieces of a world that had recently been organized into fences and silos and houses. The concrete absorbed it. They absorbed it. Pressed together in the bottom of a culvert in the absolute dark, Mara's fingers locked through his. Jack Calloway realized with the complete clarity that only genuine terror produces that he was more afraid of losing her than of dying. That was how he understood, not as metaphor, but as fact, that he loved her. He had not loved anyone in a long time. The roads had not allowed it, he had told himself. But in the bottom of the culvert, in the dark, that story dissolved too, like the other crossed-out sentences. He found her ear in the dark. "Mara," he said. She squeezed his hand. "I know," she said. She could not possibly have heard him over the sound, but she said it anyway. "I know." 4 minutes and 20 seconds after they had dropped into the culvert, the sound changed. The freight train became a wind. The wind became a roar. The roar became a howl. The howl became a whistle. The whistle became silence. Silence, after that sound, was the most extraordinary thing Jack had ever heard. They climbed out of the culvert into a world rearranged. The overpass above them was intact. The Tahoe was on its side 50 yards down the road, its roof staved in, but its frame intact. The landscape in the tornado's path was simply gone, not damaged, but absent, as though it had never existed. The sky to the northeast was still violent, but moving away, and to the southwest, tentatively, impossibly, a band of pale yellow light was appearing at the horizon. Mara was bleeding from a cut on her cheek, debris from the run to the culvert. She did not seem to know it. She was looking at the damage path with an expression that combined professional assessment and something that could only be called sorrow. "Harmon," she said. "We have to check Harmon." "I know," he said. He was already pulling his phone out as the signal returned. "Get the first aid kit from the truck. You are bleeding." She touched her face, looked at her fingers. "So I am," she said. He crossed to her and held her face in his hands and looked at the cut. Minor, a centimeter, not deep. She looked up at him from close range, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "The Tahoe is on its side," she observed. "It is," he said. "Are you going to tell me you have always wanted a red pickup truck?" she asked. He laughed. It was unexpected, the laugh. Genuine, shaking, releasing something that had been wound tight for 11 years. She started laughing too, and they stood in the road laughing in the wreckage of the storm while the yellow light spread on the horizon. And it was not funny, exactly, except that they were alive and whole and together, and the storm had done what storms do, and they were still here. Chapter 6. After the storm. Harmon had been warned. The tornado sirens had sounded 11 minutes before the storm's arrival. The warning chain working, the emergency alert system working. Ordinary people making the right decisions in the right seconds. The tornado's path struck the western half of the town directly. 41 homes were destroyed. The grain cooperative, the high school gymnasium, the volunteer fire station, all gone. But the people who had been inside them were in basements and storm shelters and highway culverts, not unlike the one that had saved Jack and Mara, and when the all-clear sounded, they came up blinking into the devastated afternoon and found themselves alive. 23 injuries, 12 of them serious, no fatalities. The storm-chasing community arrived first, before the Red Cross, before the news vans, before the state emergency management trucks. They went to work. This was the part that never made the documentaries. The chasers who spent the hours after the storm pulling debris from roads so ambulances could pass. The meteorologists who translated damage surveys into coordinates for search teams. The people who understood best what had happened and put that understanding to immediate use. Jack and Mara spent 6 hours in Harmon. She documented the damage path with scientific precision, photographing debris indicators and calculating wind speed from destruction patterns. He organized a group of chasers into a grid search of the western neighborhoods, checking every structure for anyone missed by the initial sweep. They worked separately, efficiently, without needing to explain themselves to each other. When the professional responders had fully arrived and the chasers were gently moved to the perimeter, Jack found Mara sitting on the lowered tailgate of her red pickup, which had been righted from the road ditch it had rolled into, scratched and dented but drivable. She was writing in her research notebook. He sat beside her without saying anything. The sunset, absurdly, was spectacular. Storms and sunsets have a long collaboration. After a while, she said, "I want to show you something." She turned the notebook to a page near the front, written in a different pen, an older entry. At the top, in her careful hand, "Why I Chase." Beneath it, a list that had been added to over years, the entries in slightly different inks. The last item on the list, recently added, the ink still looking fresh, read, "Because someone out there is chasing too, for reasons I have not heard yet." He was quiet for a long moment. "When did you write that?" he asked. 3 days ago, after Woodward." She closed the notebook. "I have been waiting to show it to you." Pause. There is a coda to Jack Calloway's story, and it is this. He did not stop chasing. Neither did she. What would be the point of that? To stop doing the thing that had made you who you were, that had led you to the moment that changed everything? The roads were still there. The storms were still forming. But the math changed. There were now 2 sets of tire tracks at every turnout, 2 voices on the radio, 2 laptops monitoring the radar data, 2 perspectives on storm structure that turned out, in practice, to produce better intercept decisions than one ever had. The Tahoe got a new rear window and a reinforced roll cage. The red pickup got a roof-mounted anemometer array that Mara had designed herself. They worked in the same physical space and the same intellectual space, and they made each other better, which is the best possible description of what love does when it is operating correctly. The following spring, they co-authored a paper in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society on tornado intensification in high-shear environments, drawing on data from the May 17th storm. It was cited 47 times in its first year. Jack was listed as a co-author with the title Independent Field Researcher, which made Mara laugh every time she saw it. They married the October after the storm in Enid, Oklahoma, his hometown. Small ceremony. The weather was perfect, which they both found slightly disappointing in the way that people who love storms can find perfect weather slightly disappointing. There was, however, a distant rumble of thunder during the vows, which they took as a sign. Jack still kept the shoebox of fuel receipts under the bed, but it had been moved to make room for a second shoebox, Mara's, which was more organized than his, with the receipts sorted by date and state. He looked at it sometimes in the mornings, before they were out on the road, and felt something settle in him that had been restless for 11 years. The 2013 crater was not filled. He had stopped trying to fill it. Instead, it had become useful. It was the thing that had made him pay attention. It was the thing that had brought him to that diner in Woodward with his atlas and his yellow highlighter. It was the thing that had kept him on the road long enough to be on Highway 183, the exact moment a red pickup came blowing past him at 90 miles an hour. He wrote this, finally, in the journal with the crossed-out sentences. He wrote it at the bottom of the last page, under all the failed attempts, and this time he did not cross it out. The storm does not answer anything. It reminds you of the question. And the question, it turns out, is worth everything. Outside their motel window in Liberal, Kansas, third motel this week, the spring season was active. The sky was doing something interesting. Mara came out of the bathroom toweling her hair and looked at the window and said, without needing to look at a phone or a laptop or a radar screen, we should probably get moving. Jack was already reaching for his keys. Together they drove north, into whatever was coming. The end.